Chris, give me 1 sec. I was going to test the audio, make sure we're coming out on the left.
Okay, am I testing right now?
Hold on.
Okay.
Say that again, Chris?
Testing, 1, 2. Testing for Kevin. Great. Just give it a little blow. Test. All right, Kevin, are we good? All right, we're going to get started. Welcome everyone to tonight's Lookout Primary Election Forum. We're going to be discussing the City of Santa Cruz's Measure M. Thank you all for coming this evening. My name is Christopher Neely. I write about politics and policy for Lookout, as well as author the weekly In the Public Interest newsletter, which I'm sure you all read with enthusiastic devotion. So we're here tonight to talk about Measure M. What's there to say about Measure M that hasn't already been said over the last 5 months in Lookout's op-ed section? The measure is Santa Cruz residents' latest attempt and opportunity to influence policy and the city's direction through a direct ballot initiative. Measure M asks voters 2 questions, which I will read word for word as it will appear on the ballot. Shall the City of Santa Cruz Municipal Code be amended retroactively to June 1st, 2023 to 1. Prohibit further amending the city's general plan or zoning code or associated maps to increase allowable heights or floor area ratios for all residential and non-residential development projects in all zoning districts without prior voter approval, and 2. Require development of 30 or more housing units to provide at least 25% inclusionary housing units at unspecified levels of affordability. So the questions are really, should any increases in building height beyond what is currently allowed first require a vote of the people? And should the city require developers of new residential projects with 30 or more housing units to subsidize and reserve 25% of those units for low-income residents? The civic scenesters in the crowd, you all know that this hotly debated measure has been pretty much the center of gravity in Santa Cruz's public square as we approach this March primary. But a lot of questions remain, is Measure M a force for good, or is it another attempt to squash housing development in a community desperate for more units? Will this 25% affordability requirement actually result in a flourishing of affordable units in our community, or will it create too much cost and too much burden on building and stymie housing development, leading to even fewer affordable units? Do we really need 12-story, 15-story, 17-story towers in order to meet housing goals? Or are the people who feel left behind by the city council and city planning staff correct in wanting a say? And are we really going to need, and I hope we'll get to this tonight, are we really going to need citywide elections if a person wants to build a 7-foot fence in a 6-foot fence zone? Or is that a completely wacky interpretation of the measure's language? Well, tonight, no one is leaving here until we figure this thing out. We've actually locked the doors. So here to help us do that are 2 prominent voices on each side of the measure. I have right to my left Frank Barron, a retired county planner, lifelong Santa Cruz County resident, who, with his group Housing for People, Not Unaffordable Towers, authored Measure M and collected the signatures needed to place it on the ballot. We also have Don Lane. We'll get to applause in a second, okay? We also have Don Lane, former Santa Cruz mayor and current board chair of the Affordable Housing Advocacy Group, Housing Santa Cruz County, and Mr. Lane has taken up the mantle of leading the opposition to Measure M. Now, no matter your feelings on the issue, coming up on this stage tonight to answer questions about Measure M is purely a community service. So I ask just for a quick round of applause for both of these gentlemen for helping us do that tonight. All right, so how this is going to work, Each side is going to get a quick 2-minute introduction. I'll then ask some questions to Frank and Don. We're going to allow 2 minutes for answers, roughly. And Ruby, for you guys, Ruby is going to be keeping time, so just keep one eye on her always. We'll allow some time for rebuttals, and but really, since there's only 3 of us on stage, I kind of hope that this will be a little bit more of a conversation, more debates, rather than kind of like a structured forum. And after that, we'll take some audience questions, and then we'll move on to a lightning round. Lightning round, usually something for political candidates to get a little bit of personality, but it's also a nice little exercise to kind of lighten the tension on stage. So, we'll do it at the end. Okay, and before we begin, I do want to do something real quick. I want to take a quick poll with a show of hands. So, who here believes they will support Measure M in the election? Raise your hand. Okay. And who here plans to oppose it? Okay. And who is still open-minded on the issue and feels, with the right arguments, they could be swayed to one side or the other? Okay, only a few of you, so that's kind of what we're working with tonight. Last note, just try to hold your applause between answers. We want to get to as many questions as possible. And with that, we'll kick it off, and we'll start with Frank, since he's most immediately to my left, with 2 minutes. And Ruby, you can start the clock.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Don. Measure M is simple. It does 2 things. First, it will let people vote on the city's rules governing building height. Excuse me. Oh, sorry. Let me start over. Measure M is simple. It does 2 things. First, it will let people vote before the city's rules governing building height can be changed. This gives local residents power. Secondly, it will increase the amount of affordable housing that developers will have to include in their projects by 5%. This will help deal with the affordability crisis. Don't be distracted, don't be confused. It's simple. Do you want these 2 things? If so, vote yes on M. Measure M provides for direct democracy. It requires a majority vote before the city's general plan or zoning ordinance can be changed to allow buildings above existing height limits that are already quite high at 5 to 8 stories in most of downtown and south of Laurel. M will also boost affordable housing. It increases the percentage of required affordable units from the current 20% up to 25% in projects of 30 or more units. The Planning Commission recommended a similar change, but the City Council refused to adopt it. Now voters can adopt it. Don't believe the falsehoods. Measure M does not require a vote for small projects like overheight fences or accessory dwelling units. These do not need a zoning ordinance amendment, so no citywide election would be required. Measure M does not slow the production of affordable housing. Santa Cruz is a very lucrative real estate market, and developers will still be building here, even if they have to build a few more affordable units. And there's plenty of room to meet the state mandate of 3,700 new units under existing zoning. There's no need to upzone. Measure M does not create more sprawl. Barcelona and Paris level density is already allowed in the downtown and south of Laurel. Elections under Measure M would only happen if developers want to build the 12-story towers currently proposed or the 17 and 22-story skyscrapers they have previously proposed. Measure M does not push high density into the outlying neighborhoods. It actually protects those neighborhoods by requiring an election when developers want to build higher than the typically allowed 2 to 3 stories.
Thank you. And Don, why don't you start? 2 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chris and Frank and everyone. Thanks for being here. I have some sympathy for Frank and the defenders of Measure M. At first, these folks could knock on doors and tell a one-sided version of their story, of their proposal. Now it's gotten harder. Many people who know a lot about housing policy and planning policy and housing finance are pointing out all the problems with Measure M, and there are a bunch. Here are a few examples. They can't get around the vague language they wrote and around the legal analysis showing that Measure M would require elections for many things, not just for tall apartment buildings. Take a look at the piece of paper we passed around with a few different squares, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. They can't get around the fact that pretty much all of the affordable housing groups in the area are on record against Measure M. Why would Housing Santa Cruz County and Santa Cruz YIMBY and Affordable Housing Now and the Student Housing Coalition and Housing Matters all oppose Measure M if it was good housing policy? They cannot debunk the nonpartisan analysis of Measure M conducted by the respected and professional Kaiser Marston firm. This detailed analysis showed the significant flaws in Measure M, especially around meeting our community's housing needs. The YES team tries in a bunch of ways to say something is a little off in that analysis or something wrong with the people who did the analysis. But listen carefully. The Yes on M folks are not able to demonstrate that the analysis is incorrect. Their gut feelings and hints are not a factual analysis. I've devoted most of my life to the twin issues of affordable housing and homelessness. That's why I'm here tonight. That's why I want to make sure you know that passing Measure M would be a mistake if we're to continue to make progress on these big housing challenges. Thank you.
Great. Okay. And yeah, we're going to hold applause just before, in between that. So they're going to get applause at the end. Okay. So I want to start with two quick yes or no questions for both of you. Pretty softball questions, I think. Do you want the next generation to be able to afford housing in the city of Santa Cruz? Start with Frank, yeah.
Yes, of course.
Just yes or no? Just yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And pragmatically, do you believe that is a possibility?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I'll give each of you 2 minutes with time for rebuttal, but I just wanted each of you to describe how your position on Measure M helps the city get closer to opening housing opportunities for the next generation of Santa Cruzans. And we'll start with Don, since...
Great. You know, as some of you might have noticed, I passed out on the tables this little bar graph, and there was a reason for that. And you can see that in the last 40 years in Santa Cruz, we've added over 22,000 people to our population, but only built new housing units, 6,500 new housing units. Now, our household average size is around 2.3, I believe. So that means we have not built nearly enough housing for the people who are living here now. And this is a huge problem. And it's a problem because we have had policies that are always impediments to building more affordable housing and more regular market rate housing. Now, more specifically, since the city 4 years ago adopted a new rule on inclusionary housing and went to 20% from 15%. Since that went up in the city of Santa Cruz, only one project with 14 units is either completed or under construction. In other words, when we go too high on this inclusionary rate, the housing stops being built. If we continue to stop building housing through these poor policies, such as what's contained in Measure M, we are not going to be able to see our children live in this community. And we want that. We want our children to be able to find a place to live in this community. They're not. They're moving away now.
Thanks, Don. Frank?
Measure M would require a vote only when developers want to go above the existing zoning height limits. And as I mentioned, those are quite tall already in the downtown area, 5 to 8 stories for most of the areas there. 1,200 units can be built under existing zoning in the south of Laurel area alone. That's 29 acres. That's a city study that determined that. So that's quite a bit of housing. Then north of Laurel, the traditional downtown, so probably another 1,000 units can be built there. So there is a lot of housing that can be built under existing zoning, and there will be. The citizens should have the right to be able to determine what the city is going to become, how we're going to grow. Do we really want to have, 22-story buildings, 17-story buildings? Do we want, if we do, if a majority wants it, then sure. But I think the voters should have a say in the matter.
Thank you. Don, any rebuttal?
I do want to mention that because one of the points of contention I think you well identified is what would have to be voted on. And again, I passed out on the other side, you might want to look on the other side of the paper we passed out. These are examples of what are called development projects under city planning rules. Accessory dwelling units, which are backyard cottages, apartment buildings, fences, and homeless services buildings. Yes, they are. They absolutely are. And see, this is what happens. This is so typical of the campaign. I actually have very specific data from the planning department that demonstrates this. And then folks on the other side say, no, that can't be true, that can't be true. Well, it is. It actually is. I'm part of the homeless services world. That's where I do my volunteer work. I follow these issues very closely. And if there's a proposal for a navigation center that is 5 stories, which would be 60 feet tall, adjacent to the homeless center, it would be over the zoning of that parcel, and we'd have to have a vote of the whole community to do that. And there are many other examples of where we would have to have a vote of the whole community that have nothing to do with 12-story buildings downtown.
Okay, and I'll let Frank jump in on that, and then I have a question about that as well.
So accessory dwelling units would not require a vote. Anything that requires a vote would have to be something that changes the zoning ordinance or the general plan. It would have to be an amendment to that. Accessory dwelling units are allowed. They don't require a change to the zoning ordinance or the general plan. Apartment buildings, same thing. There's plenty of areas zoned for very tall apartment buildings, and with the density bonus, they can usually go 2 or 3 floors above the existing zoning. Fences. Those can be done pretty much over the counter with a conditional fence permit. It does not require a zoning ordinance amendment or a general plan amendment. Homeless services buildings. So that's something where if you have housing involved, you can probably get a density bonus to be able to go higher. And so there's probably ways for that to get done without any kind of a zoning amendment.
Okay, and I want to jump in here real quick because this is something now, Don, in an op-ed you wrote for Lookout, you said that there might be a citywide vote required or triggered if an individual wants to build a 7-foot fence on their property in a 6-foot fence zone. I think that's been broadly denied, even by planning staff. It will not happen on an individual level, but
Please, could you please read exactly what I said? Don't you misquoted me, so I want you to read it if you're going to quote me.
I do not have it here. Can you?
What I said is if we're going to change the rules, so you want to build a 7-foot fence in your backyard.
Right.
And that has not been debunked. That's exactly the opposite. If one person wants to build a fence, they can get the kind of permit Frank's talking about. If we want to change the rules so not every single person who wants that little bit taller fence, if we want to change the rules so we just say, hey, that's the new rule, citywide vote. Ask the city attorney, ask Kaiser Marston, ask the planning director. They will all tell you the same thing. It's a different thing when you change the rules. You can get exceptions, but if you're changing the rules for the community, you have to have a vote of the whole community.
And that is, and Frank, before you jump in, I just want to say that is true. And that has been said, and city attorneys said the same thing, is that if there wants to be a broad zoning change on fence heights, this could trigger an election. But a lot of it's kind of unknown. We actually don't know whether or not someone will test this in court, how a judge would interpret it. But Frank, if you could just kind of talk to the risk of a judge possibly interpreting the language. I mean, Gary Patton, someone who endorses the Measure M, he's a land use attorney, he said that it is open to interpretation. It's not necessarily rock solid against that it won't be interpreted that way.
It's very clear. The wording in the implementation section of the ordinance says the only thing that requires a vote is a general plan amendment or a zoning ordinance amendment that increases height. So that's the only time that a Measure M election would be triggered.
I want to say I absolutely agree. That's exactly what it says. And I want to read what you mentioned, what Gary Patton said. He says, this is your quote. You got him to say this, Chris. Those who are saying it's unclear and the fence argument could apply, they have a point. I mean, this is a guy who is the signer of the ballot argument in favor of Measure M, a well-known land use attorney, and he's saying, he literally also said, quote, I'm very happy to say as an attorney that I didn't write this thing, because he knows that it was not written to do what Frank and others wanted it to. They wrote it more broadly, and they made a mistake.
It's very clear what it says, and you just have to read it, and it's the only time that an election is triggered is if there's a general plan amendment or a zoning ordinance amendment that raises the height of buildings. That's
Not of buildings. It does not. It says development
so
projects.
you're
Frank, you're saying buildings, but the language in it says development projects, and those are not just
It's not
buildings.
realistic to say that the city's going to change the fence requirements. I mean, that is something that's been in effect for decades, if not centuries. Okay, that anybody can get a overheight fence permit. It's just a conditional permit. You go in and you get it. It's not a big deal. Anybody who wants one can get one. They don't need to change the zoning ordinance or the general plan.
And just going off of that, what I got Gary Patton to say, was he also said that, that he doesn't necessarily believe that a judge would, judges kind of go by this, they read the whole resolution and they go by the spirit and intent of the measure. I mean, do you think that this is, but Frank, do you feel like, is it a risk for, just because the wording is a little more broad than a land use attorney who endorses Measure M said that they would have really liked, it leaves it open to interpretation. Is it a risk?
No risk whatsoever. It's very clear, and the city attorney agrees.
Okay.
Wait, say that again? The city attorney agrees
Yeah,
there's no
yeah.
risk?
No, he agreed with my interpretation of it in the ballot language, so read it.
Right. But he didn't
Which-
agree once he heard these arguments, and he said, no, it's really ambiguous, and it could very well end up in court. He was quoted in the same article we keep referring to,
Yeah.
and I hope you read what Chris wrote.
No, I did. I read it, but-
And it's all there.
Yeah, Tony Condotti did say, the city attorney, he did say that he just, so much of it remains to be tested in court. We won't really know whether or not something like this will trigger an election. Honestly, testing statutes by litigation is not the most ideal way, but sometimes it's the way you have to do it. All right, we're going to move on a little bit.